So when we say IP is now treated as a bankable asset, what do we actually mean by that?
Okay, well, bankable is a kind of convenient term to try to separate out the IP that a lender is likely to be willing to consider at this point in the market's development compared with IP that they probably won't be willing to consider. And the really critical thing, I think, is whether the IP is revenue generative. I think it's important to be really clear about that. It's not that intellectual property can't be valuable before it's actually associated with cash flows. Of course it can, and quite a lot of the work that we do for the equity investors, for example, is precisely trying to quantify what that value might be. But I think the point about revenue generation is firstly that if you're going to borrow against these assets, against their value, very clearly it's necessary to have some means of making that repayment. And if there aren't any cash flows, then it's perfectly reasonable for a lender to question whether it's really appropriate to harness those kind of assets as security, whether they're really delivering value. And I think the other point about it is that if the business is generating revenue from the intellectual property assets, it has customers in particular, and those customers are showing that they're willing to pay for these, whatever it might be, goods or services that are supported by the intellectual property, or even licensing the intellectual property, because that's a perfectly good way of being able to commercialize the assets, then there can be much more confidence that somebody else will be prepared to give some value for those assets in the future, should that ever become necessary. So I think bankability is fundamentally about cash flows for those two reasons.